attention, please? We're very pleased today to have Suzanne Miller of Two Green Chicks from Monroe. So we'll be getting started. I'll give you the floor.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I am Suzanne. I am a green chick, and my partner, Nikki Cooper, actually teaches school on Thursday and Friday, so she is not here with me today, so I'm flying solo. We are called Green Chicks because we recycle all of our artwork that we do. It's approximately 90% recycled materials that we create our sculptures out of. So as we go through here, it is like a 10-step process in order to get from start to finish on our pieces. I'm going to demonstrate as much as I can today. Obviously, these pieces have a lot of drying time and stuff in between, so I'll show you the basics. And as we talk, I'll kind of go through the history of this because it was kind of a long process to just come up with this whole concept. I am a professional artist. I have been doing this full-time for the last 5 years, which I think as artists, that's something we all kind of strive to achieve, to be able to do our art full-time. I have worked in, if you name a particular area of art, chances are I have worked in that area at some point in my life. So I have a pretty varied history, but now I am down to doing what I absolutely love, and I feel very, very fortunate to be able to do that. So where I'm going to start today is just explaining a little bit about how our artwork starts out. So types of things we recycle, mostly plastic bottles. All of the pieces that we make, we start out with plastic bottles, balls of newspaper, wire, and duct tape. And I have pretty red duct tape because I buy wholesale. So that's kind of where they start out. It is a process of mache, but we do not use paper mache, we do fabric mache, and we actually use quilting scraps. We use sheets that we get from Monroe Clinic when they are getting rid of their old sheets. We get those and we tear those up to use for our fabric mache. And then our final coat is newspaper clay, which is made from newspaper pulp. So it is a pulp clay. It is air dried, which takes a long time to dry. And then we have some acrylic coatings that go over the top before the paint and varnish go down. So again, it's about 9 to 10 steps in the process, start to finish. So our artwork, we mostly do art fairs at this point. We mainly do like more of the high-end art fairs. We do like Art Fair off the Square in Madison. We are getting into some Chicago shows and things now. We started out doing some smaller shows early on, and we're kind of trying to find where we fit now. But we're kind of finding our way through this whole art process. So again, we start out with plastic bottles. Other things we recycle are things like golf balls. We turn golf balls into computer gremlins and golf ball birdies. So these are simply golf balls with newspaper clay, so these are a little bit simpler. I have what I call egg pets. So you saw a bunch of these on the tables downstairs. That's because they are made from plastic Easter eggs. So everybody has a ton of these. People give them to us at the end of the season. And I just kind of tape a few of them together, different sizes, and then the newspaper clay goes over the top, and we have egg pets. We also do, we use tennis balls. We have a friend that's a tennis coach, so he gives us all of his dead balls after tennis season. And we make tennis ball buddies. I don't have any finished ones here, but this is one that is in process right now. So they're just little chubby pet animals. And then newspaper turtles. So these start out as Meow Mix containers. And there's a couple toothpicks and a couple beads that serve as the structure under the head, but then it just gets covered with the newspaper clay. So they are kind of done in stages and then put all together. I have baby dragons. These are also made from the larger size Easter eggs and some of the smaller size Easter eggs as well. So we use a little bit of everything. We do live in Monroe. We have a lot of friends there that have families, whatever. Nikki and I both have families that we generate enough recycled. to pretty much supply us. We have asked for recycling in the past and just have had like piles of garbage piled in front of our studio door, and we stopped doing that. We go through a lot of newspaper, and again, we have a couple sources for newspaper now. We stopped asking for things because, got out of hand.
Do you use medicine bottles, pill bottles?
I do, but we have a lot of them already, so. So, to start, a lot of our little critters, creatures, animals, like these, start out as a plastic bottle. You can kind of see the shape in there. So for these, we do a lot of cutting of plastic. And there's good plastic and there's not so good plastic. Plastic water bottles, they have to be like a little more firm plastic. A lot of the water bottles they come out with now are the really scrunchy ones that are better for the environment, but bad for recycled art. So we use like heavier gauge plastic, but they're still kind of squishy, so everything has to be like filled up with newspaper. Our studio is in Monroe. We are on the square right downtown, but we have an upstairs studio. We are above the green door on the south side of the square. Not anymore. This process takes a very long time. Like I said, it has so many steps, and there's drying time in between each class. So we tried doing classes for a while, but people wouldn't show up for a class, so you're doing a class with the clay stage, and then they wouldn't show up the next week and the next week, so then you're making clay like every class, and it got to be too difficult. So we do a few painting classes and stuff here and there, but we're starting to phase that out as well. We also used to have a gallery in Monroe in our space, because we have like 2 rooms in the upstairs, but it got too hard. We were doing consignment and stuff with other artists, which was great to help local artists, but it was a lot of work on our end with paperwork and keeping up with all of that, and we travel on the weekends to do shows, so that got too difficult too. So now we do shows and we make art, and that's it. So this is the start of my, I think I'll make a dog, cat, whatever, we'll see what it grows into. But this is the beginnings. He needs a head. I think I'll use this bottle. I go through a lot of scissors. Right.
Do you use toilet paper tubes?
Yes, we do. They make good legs. Legs. Well, and we get creative. I mean, a lot of, some of our pieces are just like the one that I'm doing here, where you just grab a bottle and you just start building something and see what it grows into. And it might start out as one thing and turn into something completely different. You just never know. But other times we plan and draw things out ahead of time and then find the recycled pieces that you need to build something in particular. And I will talk about that in a minute too. I also go through a lot of duct tape. Started ordering it by the case now. About 2 cases of 24 a year, I would say. Okay, that's not gonna work. I don't like this piece, so I'm gonna cut it off. Yeah, supply-wise, I can't even tell you how much recycling we go through in a year. We have Rubbermaid containers, like the big ones, and we keep supplies of those in the studio, and we just grab what we need at any given time, and we are doing more and more shows these days, so we're going through a lot, which is great. Nikki is usually the one here with all the recycle facts, so she usually fills everybody in on that, but I don't have that information. So I'm thinking this is some kind of a big-headed cartoon dog. All right, so we now have a head, and we have a body, and he needs some legs. So I have this whole box of old paintbrushes. I used to teach elementary art at the Catholic school in Monroe, and Nikki still teaches there now. So we bring old retired paintbrushes that really are kind of junky and crusty and that don't work anymore. And those become little legs for our creatures. So take a couple of those and we tape those all together. Sometimes, yep. People know what we do. We usually keep a list on our website of stuff that we are looking for. So we do accept some things. So, and a lot of people, if they're cleaning out their studios or if they have art supplies from kids that have left the house or whatever, we will take that and use them for whatever. We'll find something to incorporate them into. So, you kind of get the idea here of how this works, and we just keep building it up until we get a specific structure. So that's the base. So like I said, some pieces we just start out, we do a lot of dogs and cats, we do crazy dragons, anything kind of fantastical, whimsical, whatever. Other times, we start out with drawings of specifically things that we want to make. So a lot of times when we're sitting at art fairs, we just sit and sketch. Nikki is a cartoonist, so she has these beautiful finished drawings with these perfect thick and thin lines, and I'm kind of a scrawler. So I'm a scribble scrawler, and so I just sit and draw out ideas for what's coming up. And again, sometimes I'll think in terms of different recycled pieces that I have on hand. Other times, I just start drawing and see what comes to light. We do a lot of commission work. Epic company in Verona buys tons and tons of our artwork. We're kind of right up their alley. Of all of the artists that they buy from, they have the most artwork of ours, which is kind of impressive. That's very fun. So we create a lot of theme pieces for them. They call and ask for specific things that we'll make for them, or otherwise we just know what theme buildings they have coming up, so we'll create art along those themes. My project for the beginning of this year, I was contacted by Parthenon Gyros in Madison. They're a restaurant on State Street, and they're doing a complete remodel, and they wanted something kind of quirky and unique for their restaurant. So right now, I am working on a whole series of sheep and cows as Greek gods and goddesses. So I have Medusa up here, but I have a whole series of Poseidon and Apollo and Aphrodite. So they're all sheep. It's kind of fun. With her loving gyro. So that's a whole series, but as I'm doing this, honestly, as an artist, I don't know what we did before the internet, because I can go on and find pictures of pretty much anything that I could possibly need pictures of. I'll print them off or keep my computer close by, but that's kind of dangerous to the computer with the stuff I do. But I use the internet a ton for just reference pictures for things. But I do draw everything out ahead of time. A couple pieces that I am working on right now. We are in the process of getting ready for art fair season. So I've been drawing. So this is kind of my hippie series. I've done 3 hippies so far. They're always, usually playing instruments and whatever. So, and they all have names. I started out with Larry, who, if you look at the computer later, there's a couple of them in there. I had Larry, Barry, and Gary. So I now have Mary, and this is going to be Mary. So you can see how detailed some of the armatures get with the wire and whatnot. So this is all bent wire and stuff for her hair and for her arms. We use electric fence wire. We get it, Nikki gets it recycled because her husband's a farmer, so she goes and steals it. I have to buy mine, but so it is kind of recycled when she uses hers. But so a lot of our pieces are, we just use different gauges of electric fence wire, so things for like ears and fingers and fine details is just bent wire that we cover with the tape. So anyway, I'm not sure what his name is going to be yet. He's my bongo player. But I have the drawing, and I created my sculpture accordingly. So that's step one. Step two is making the goop. I'm going to remember to take my wedding ring off this time because my husband gets mad at me when I don't. We replaced the ring like 3 times, and then I had it completely remade now because, you know. So the next step here is to make a paper mache goop. And if you ever made paper mache as a kid or whatever, it's basically the same formula. This is a highly technical formula. There's water. Everything must be measured out exactly or it won't be right. So use some glue and flour. Okay, very technical. It's got to be exactly right or it won't turn out right. So you dump a bunch of this in a bowl and you mix it up so it looks like pancake batter. So we have our lovely pancake batter. I like to get the lumps out, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And then we have our fabric, and just like doing paper mache, you dip in your goop, take off your excess, and you wrap it. Now, the benefits of using the fabric instead of paper mache, if you've ever done paper mache, you need like 20 layers of it on there in order for it to like be sturdy enough. Fabric mache, you need like 2 layers. The problem with the paper or the fabric mache is if you get wrinkles in it, they're there. And you got to deal with that because it gets very hard and it's hard to get off once it is completely dry. So we cover this with our fabric, and then it gets put in front of a fan for a day or 2. And once it comes out, it will look like this. So, doesn't have a lot of detail yet, but it's fairly strong, not completely stable, but it's a good base armature. All of these little wire parts are now nice and firm, and it's strong enough that it makes a good base for the clay. I know some of them look kind of cool just in this stage. Doesn't matter what color the fabric is because we're going to cover it all up with clay. So,
Why did you go to fabric over paper?
just because it's a time saver, because you only need like 2 layers instead of like 20 layers. It's just a lot easier to work with once you get used to it. It takes a little getting used to using the fabric, again, because the fabric likes to bunch up and wrinkle, and if those wrinkles dry, you can't do much with it. But okay, so next step is paper clay. This is newspaper pulp. So you can make your own at home by taking newspaper, tear it up into little bits, put it in a pot on the stove, cook it up until it disintegrates, then take a blender and mix it up until you got pulp. I did that for many years. Now I go to the hardware store and buy cellulose insulation, which works just as well, and that's all recycled as well. And it already comes in paper pulp form. You soak it in some water, and you're good to go. So with this, it's been soaked in water, but you still need to squeeze out all of the excess water. So I get back down to just a wet paper pulp. Oh, sorry. Don't mean to squirt anybody in the front row. Kind of like being at SeaWorld. I'm just going to do a little bit here. Okay, so I have my paper pulp that's been soaked and squeezed. Just gonna break it up a little bit. I take my same goop, dump some of that in. And Nikki and I make our clay completely different. I mean, we use the same basic techniques, but she likes a really dry clay, and I like mine a little more squishy. She tends to do smaller pieces, and she does like more of the dogs and cats. My background is in theater, which I'll tell you about in just a little bit here, but I'm used to working very large. So a lot of the bigger pieces are my pieces. So there I dumped in too much goop. I put more pulp in with my clay. So now I have a nice paper clay. So the clay just goes on squish it on. With the clay, you don't really want to get it more than a couple inches thick. So if you have something where you need to build up a lot of clay, you want to do it over the course of a few days. So you want to let it dry for a while and then put another layer over the top. But for these little egg pets, I start out with my Easter egg, and I will build this part. So I'll make a little neck and just cover it with clay, and then I will let that dry for a couple days, and then I'll go back through and add on the head and the ears and all the little facial features. Eyeballs and things, we use a lot of those little flat marbles, the little glass marbles, because they're nice and smooth. So we just kind of shove those into the clay, as you can see on that. Baby dragons, this is the start of a baby dragon. Again, I start out with just that Easter egg shape, and I build up this little base with the tail and the basics of a head, and then I'll add on all the details in my second round of clay. From there, we have to cover the clay with something that is going to seal the clay, because even once it's dry, it's very porous. There's like a really, really rough texture, which is good for some things, but other times you want things that are a little more smooth. So we started doing a layer of modeling paste. It's a mixture of modeling paste and acrylic gel, and I just have mine mixed up in here. So I don't know how many of you have used modeling paste before, but it's like a really thick acrylic, and you can actually use it for texture. You can draw into it or whatever to add textures. So we use it for like drawing in scales, feathers, fur. You just use a pencil or another tool to just kind of sketch into it to make texture. So that's what the modeling paste is. We mix it with acrylic gel because modeling paste on its own will crack if you get it too thick. Acrylic gel is a lot more flexible, so you mix just a little bit of acrylic gel in with the modeling paste and it keeps it from cracking. So we put that layer on, and then we do a gesso over the top of that to give us a nice surface. So this one is in the gesso stage. It's already been textured, and now it's ready for paint. So we do 2 or 3 layers of paint, and then we have a 2-part varnish that goes over the top. So many, many, many layers. We also do wall pieces. So the wall pieces start out, I have wood canvases. I have a handy husband who makes all my wood canvases for me. But they start out as a canvas that's on plywood. These kind of get built up the same way. If they have pieces that really stick out, that are going to need a lot of clay, I will use this same basic process and use my balls of newspaper and my tape. I will actually hot glue them to the board to keep them in place because the duct tape doesn't always like to stick to plywood. But I will add on with my wire, make my ears, anything that's going to be sticking out. But then I go through the same process. I do the fabric mache and then the clay over the top of that. So the wall pieces are pretty popular. I have that one. This is a little bit bigger one. This is my detective dogs. And now we're getting into a lot of more the kind of adding on found pieces. People bring us like old glasses, old pieces of jewelry and whatever, and we started incorporating a lot of that into our pieces as well. I take old frames. I go to our St. Vincent de Paul store, buy old frames, and plywood inserts. My husband and I donate a lot of time to Monroe Theater Guild. We build a lot of sets and things, and so I take all the scraps out of the scrap bins and fill all my frames with plywood. And like this piece had a few add-ons with the wire, but most of this was all just newspaper clay. So I'm recycling frames. Here's another piece with lots of add-ons. Her name is Fiona.
Will these break if they're dropped?
They are not as breakable as like a ceramic piece. They might chip a little bit. The paint might chip if you drop them on like a cement floor. If you drop them on carpet, they're perfectly fine. There's so many layers underneath. It might crack a little bit, paint chip, but that's about it. Are they okay outside? They do have an exterior varnish on them. I've had pieces out on my covered front porch that have been there years. I bring them in during the winter and put them back out during the summer, and they can go outside, but ultimately they're a mache, so they will break down over time, but they will last, quite a few years outside. We recycle paintbrushes. So I've been making little paintbrush families, and it was just one of those things. Again, we volunteer a lot for theater, so there's always dried out paintbrushes somewhere. So I started gluing them together and making families. So that's kind of fun. And then I've been into the whole steampunk craze. So I've been taking a lot of items, found items, and making these little like mechanically looking flying creatures, which is kind of fun. Using the glue to do that is not so fun. Open the windows. Yeah. So anyway, that's my basic process. So how did I get started in this? Well, again, that was a long process too. I went to UW-Madison for art and graphic design. But while I was there, I got a work-study job in the theater department as a scene shop assistant. So I worked in props, and I worked in helping the scenic artists paint scenery. I'd never really painted before, before that time. And I've always loved theater. I was in theater all the way through high school, but never really got involved with the technical side of things. And going behind the scenes and building props, especially when you don't have a budget to build anything, you learn to make stuff out of nothing. So it kind of started there. I took one sculpture class while I was in college, and our teacher was very much into recycling. And he had us actually go out on the streets in Madison and pick up garbage and then bring it back to the classroom, and we had to create sculpture. So that's kind of where the interest in this started. Also, in that same class, a paint company in town had a whole vat of like some acrylic base that had gotten contaminated with rust, and they donated it to the college. And we were told we had to use it. So we started the process of using mache, dipped in this acrylic base to make our sculptures. And so that kind of got the wheels clicking a little bit. So then I just started experimenting a little bit with it on our own. After college, I worked as a graphic designer for a little bit. And my husband, who I met in the theater department in Madison, got hired to work for V Corporation, who did the Sesame Street Live productions. So he did sound and lighting for them. And after we got married, I was hired to go out on the road to do costumes. So I did costumes for Sesame Street. And again, it was the touring show, so we got married and went on a 4-year honeymoon traveling all over the country, Canada, Mexico, Alaska, Hawaii, we went all over. So I started out in costumes, but then they found out I did props, so later on in that first tour, I started doing props, and I did props for another 3 years. But then we worked in the scene shop in Minneapolis during the summer and built props. So while we were doing that, I would get bored backstage. So between shows, I started making gargoyles using this process, just kind of playing on my own. Shortly after that, I started teaching gargoyle class to all of our performers. We would sit around between shows and make art. And that's kind of where this all started. Once we left tour, I went back to school as a graphic designer. My husband went back to college to finish his degree. And I never stopped doing my art. I was working in advertising 60 hours a week and still would come home and try to fit in artwork. Once my husband got out of school, we moved to Wisconsin, to Monroe, and I started doing art as a stay-at-home mom. Being a stay-at-home mom after working in advertising, that was a big adjustment. So my artwork was my sanity. But I needed to keep doing my art and making sure I made time for it. So I started teaching classes to other moms out of my house. So I dedicated one room in my house as my studio, and one of the first people to walk in my door was Nikki Cooper, who was my partner. She was a cartoonist, and I introduced her to my sculpture method, and she just took off with it. Absolutely loved it, because she could take her cartoons and make them real. And so we started creating art together. We started doing just a couple art fairs, mostly like crafty fairs here and there. That was back in 2006. And then we just kept growing so much that we eventually got the studio in Monroe. And now, again, I'm doing this full time. She's only doing it part-time yet. She's 6 years younger than me, and it kind of follows in my footsteps. So every time I leave a job, she takes that job. And so I worked in the Catholic school for 13 years as an art teacher, and I left there 5 years ago. She took my job from there. So she's teaching to school today, and I'm here. But yeah, we are like best of friends. We share the studio 3 days a week. We get to do the art fairs on the weekends, so we ditch our families and we take off, and we have a blast. So it's fun work. It is art that makes you happy, and that is kind of our main focus. We try to create art that is friendly for everybody. It is very much geared toward kids and families, and we try to price our things so that they are more affordable for like the everyday person. But you know, when we have a whole booth filled with these things that are looking at you, some people are very intimidated and don't want to walk in. But other people come in and just feel like they're at home. It's like going to the circus. So we absolutely love what we're doing, and just bringing happiness to people through our artwork is very, very important to us and very rewarding. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I would welcome some questions. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
You know, I have no children, so I'm not into little people things, but can I ask how much money some of these things are to buy?
It really depends. I mean, we have stuff that are as low as like, $10, $12. And then we go up to some of the pieces that I sell to Epic are $4,000. I mean, it's a wide range, but the big ones.
Yeah, people special order things.
Yes, right.
I'm just flabbergasted.
This is one of the pieces that is just on plywood. This is one of the pieces for Parthenon Gyros also, and this is their founder. They are like in their third generation of family that has owned this restaurant, and this is the grandfather that kind of started it all. So this is kind of a caricature of him as a shepherd, which is where he started before he came over to this country. Yes.
To make it stick to the wood.
It's got glue in it. All of the glue that's in here adheres it to the surface.
But do you put wires extending out from the wood?
From, this one is completely cut out. Since it's going in a restaurant, they didn't want too many things sticking out from it because they were afraid of people like breaking stuff off. So this one had to be pretty flat. But if there are ears and things like that, I'll build them up with the wire just like I do the 3D pieces and glue them to the board and then do the fabric mache and then the newspaper clay over the top.
So when you pack these to go home, do you put them in bubble pack or what do you wrap?
Yeah, I usually pack them all in bubble wrap. But again, they're pretty sturdy. So we don't have to worry too much. If you drop them on cement, yeah, that's
You're not going to heave them in your van.
No, but sometimes we do. If we're packing up and it's raining, anything can happen.
It isn't like each one needs its box.
No, it's not like hauling ceramic or anything like that. When we go to art fairs, you have a big wind that comes through and you hear things crashing and we're just like, we're good. So, yeah, yes. What kind of paint? I use all acrylic paint and many layers of acrylic paint. I stick with mostly Liquitex. We use some liquid acrylics, but mostly tube acrylics just because the color is brighter. We used to use like cheaper paint, and it's one of those things as you go through life as an artist, you learn to use a little bit better products. So yeah, so mostly acrylics. The varnish that we put on is a higher end varnish that is, it's actually water soluble, but it's an exterior varnish with a UV protectant in it that we have to special order. But so everything we use is pretty environmentally friendly as well. So, any other questions? Yes?
When you give your presentation, do you ever put what's flashing on your computer on the board behind you?
I do, yes, but I didn't have enough time to get that together today. Yeah, I put that up there so you can kind of see the wide variety of things that we do. And it's hard to kind of gauge the size of some of these things. Some of these sculptures are like 5 feet tall. We do a lot of custom pieces. My focus lately has been, we do custom pets, but it gets kind of boring after a while to just do, a dog, whatever. Nikki likes to do those. I get a little crazier. So I've been trying to talk people into like trying to come up with the personality of their dogs, and since I'm theatrical, dressing them in costumes that go along with their personalities. So one that just was up there was a Victorian portrait of their 3 dogs. One is as like a jester. Another one is the matriarch of the family. And yeah, and that kind of stuff is kind of more fun. Yes?
When you do something like the cow sculpture where you've got 4 separate legs, where would you say most of the strength comes from, the putty or the mache?
It's a combination of everything. Whenever we have something that has legs on it, that's going to be your breaking point if it drops or whatever. So when we're building, we make sure that the structure underneath is sound first. So that's going to be the most important thing, is making sure your wire or whatever you have under there in your legs is sound before you put the mache on. And like this one is a little wobbly, this one's perfectly fine. She'll probably do another layer of mache over this one before she puts the clay on, because you really want to make sure you get that strength in there first. Make sure every layer is strong so that you don't have that breakage. But the clay is once it dries, it's like rock hard, so it's keeps a lot of the structure there as well. Any other questions?
So how do you store your clay and stuff?
The clay, once it's, I usually will use it. That's how turtles started. They used to be called leftover turtles because anytime I had leftover clay, I'd make a turtle. So, and I still kind of do that. I keep Easter eggs and stuff on hand, and I'll build like the bases and things. So if I have a pile of clay left over, I'd make that. And since I taught school, I used to do all this with the kids in school, and Nikki does the same thing. She teaches this process to her kids at school. So she'll come in with buckets of leftover clay, and then we'll just make lots of little stuff. But that's how a lot of that started. But when I'm working on big pieces like this, this cow picture, I had 9 of those to make. And so I was making literally vats of clay to get that project completed. So we go through a lot of the clay. But there's always little stuff left over. You can store this in the refrigerator. You can even put it in the freezer, but it kind of changes the texture a little bit of the clay. But I've kept it for up to a week or 2 in the refrigerator, as long as you make it airtight. Otherwise, it grows lovely black mold that's probably not so good for you. Yes?
Do you have another step plan for your hippie girl?
Yes, this is just the very first layer. So the hippie girl will get she's got to be fabric mache'd next. And she's a little challenging with the fabric mache because there's lots of little tiny fingers and things in there. So she'll get fabric mache'd, and then she'll have the full range of clay covering her as well before she gets painted. So lots more layers to go. That's, like step 2. So, anything else? We have a lot of fun. We're like sisters. We're like soul sisters in the studio. We laugh like all day long, and we bounce ideas off of each other. We'll start out with one concept, and it'll just grow. We are very compatible that way, and every day is fun. Fun to go to work, which is the way it should be.
So how do you manage home and
Managing home and my business has always been a struggle. My last kid just left home this last year, so I'm free and clear. Nikki's got 3 kids at home yet. And that was a challenge, but I used to teach a lot of art classes. Before I was doing this full time, I taught at school a couple days a week, but then I would fill in with like after school art classes and things, and my kids would just come along. And they would take the classes, right along with everybody else. Didn't matter if they were too young for the class or whatever, they would do the projects anyway. It got a little harder. Well, we didn't really get into too many of the shows until my kids were older, but then we would grab them to come along and help at the shows as well. Once they were in high school, it was great because I could have them help with like base painting and primer painting and all of that good stuff till they got tired of it. Then I'd have their friends come over because their friends thought it was cool. So it's actually harder now that they're out of the house because I lost all my little helpers that used to help with some of the easy stuff. But it's a challenge. Right now with the amount of shows that we do during the summer, we do 2 or 3 shows a month during the summer months. And I can have weeks where I am literally working 16 to 20 hours a day around the clock. And that gets a little old, but then, you get to, December, January, and things kind of slow down, and you have time to rethink your life a little bit and plan your coming year, and it's all balance. Yeah.
Did you ever have a show at Art Fair on the Square?
We have not done Art Fair on the Square in Madison. We have stuck with Art Fair off the Square. I applied a couple times and did not get in, but looking at the nightmare it is to try to try to unload and load up during that show, I honestly don't know if we could get enough work done to do that show. They sell so much up there. So Art Fair off the Square, that is all Wisconsin artists. It's more of a family. We've been doing that show for so many years now that we know a lot of the other artists and the people who are running the show, that it's like family. And so to even apply for that other show that goes on at the same time, would be like ditching your family, and I don't want to do that.
There's a holiday show at,
Monona Terrace Art Fair off the Square. Yes, we do that one every year. Yeah.
You got artwork at Epic. We went there once, but the place is huge. Do you have a map that would show where your stuff is?
I toured last year and did all of the tours that they allow you to go on, and I found 2 of my pieces. They probably have 100 or more of our pieces, and I couldn't find any. But a lot of the artwork that they have of ours are in the buildings that they don't allow tours in, because they have the Wizarding School, which we do so many dragons and things like that they have a ton of that. We've done a lot for Alice in Wonderland, and a lot of they have like a fairy tale, Grimm's fairy tale building. So we've done a lot of work for them with that. But they don't allow tours of those areas, so I haven't seen it yet. So you need to know somebody that works there and get a private tour, and then you can find it. Yes?
What's the largest piece you made?
Largest piece I ever made. Well, if you're considering this kind of artwork, I did a 5-foot-tall Willy Wonka freestanding sculpture this last year. He was probably the biggest piece. I also did another Alice in Wonderland piece that was almost that big. That was a steampunk Mad Hatter. That was pretty big. He's on there too. But when you're talking theater, I mean, I did a lot bigger pieces for theater. So yes, but it's basically the same process. Any other questions? All good? So, thank you.